Hi, I am Miss Jill. I am a little and I love stories. And I read stories for a living. And so today I am going to read a story for you. The story is from the book of Fairy Princes. It is by Isabel Wyatt. It is Floris Books. It is the second story. It's a short story. The second story, I don't think there's any pictures. I don't think there's any pictures. The pictures have to come from here. Okay? So, here is one of my favorite, I can't say my favorite story because I have so many favorite children's books. I can't even begin to tell you how many favorite children's books I have. Okay, The Fox Who Went to Heaven. Ragnahart the fox was the cleverest animal in the forest. Indeed, that was why he was called Ragnahart, which means strong through cunning. He was the sprucest and best groomed of all the animals, with his long, neat muzzle, his bright, quick eyes, his gleaming red-brown coat, and his magnificent bushy brush. He was very light and sure on his feet, and very brisk and swift in his movements. In fact, he was full of forest virtues, but he was also conceited and looked down on less gifted animals, and his glossy coat covered a heart of stone. One evening toward supper time, Ragnahart strolled out to visit a farmyard on the edge of the forest where there lived a fine, plump young hen, about whom Ragnahart had for some weeks been thinking lovingly at this hour of the day. Just as he had expected, there was the fine, plump young hen roosting in a tree, her eyes already drowsily half-closed. Good evening, said Ragnahart heartily, bowing in a very polished fashion. What a beautiful picture you make up there, dear hen. And he was an excellent climber. And what an excellent climber you must be to climb such a difficult tree. I doubt if I could climb it. Oh, I did not climb it, sir. I flew, said the innocent young hen, bobbing Ragnahart a curtsy, and thinking that there was not one animal in the farmyard who had such exquisite manners. You flew? Repeated Ragnahart, apparently in surprise. How is it, then, that I have never seen you flying in the forest? Oh, sir, the little hen explained, my wings are not really flying wings. They will carry me just up here to roost, but they would never carry me through the forest. What a pity, said Ragnahart, shaking his head sadly, when there are all manner of marvels to be seen there. Would you like to see them? Wouldn't you? Indeed I would, sir, said the little hen longingly. Then you shall come for a ride through the forest on my brush, said Ragnahart, brightening. I run like the wind, so you will know what it feels like to really fly. And you will see all the marvels of the forest, too. So the cunning Ragnahart stretched out his fine bushy brush, and the innocent little hen, flattered to be noticed by such an elegant and courtly animal, fluttered down from the tree and perched on it. And off Ragnahart went through the forest, running like the wind. Are you enjoying it? He called back to the little hen. Oh, sir, it is wonderful, she replied, her little round eyes shining with excitement. I never knew there were so many marvels in the forest, and you go so swiftly that it is just as if I were flying for the first time in my life. Spread out your wings, said Ragnahart kindly, and then it will be as if you were really flying. So the innocent little hen spread out her wings, and in doing so, she lost her balance and fell off Ragnar-Hart's brush. And hey, presto! In a twinkle, Ragnar-Hart had pounced on her and killed her. Now it was one of the customs of the forest for all the animals to foregather at the Sibyl's bower when the sun went down, and to eat their evening meal together. And as Ragnar-Hart, carrying the plump little hen, made his way through the forest toward the Sibyl's bower, he fell in with Bruno the bear. Bruno was a great, shaggy, shabby, shuffling, shambling, untidy, clumsy creature. And the clever, elegant, and nimble Ragnar-Hart loved to poke fun at his slow wits and moth-eaten coat and dreamy ways. But whereas Ragnar-Hart had a heart of stone under his glossy coat, Bruno, under his moth-eaten one, had a heart of gold. But Ragnar-Hart did not know what either heart was made of, for his eyes were so bright and sharp that they could see only the outside of things and not what was inside them. "Good evening, Bruno," said Ragnar-Hart gaily, and because he was very pleased with his own wiliness, he told the bear the story of how he had snared the innocent little hen for his supper. "Now, wasn't that very clever?" he asked when he had finished. Beside him, Bruno stumbled along on his short hind legs as if he were not quite happy. "Yes, it was very clever, Ragnar-Hart," he agreed slowly. "Only it wasn't quite kind, was it, to the little hen?" Ragnar-Hart threw back his sleek, well-groomed head and laughed and laughed. "Kind to the little hen," he repeated. "A fox must eat." He looked up at Bruno and saw that he was supperless, so he went on teasingly, "A bear must eat too." "How are you going to get your supper, Bruno, since you're scorned to get it by cleverness as I got mine?" And Bruno answered very simply, "I shall sing for it." Again Ragnar-Hart threw back his head and laughed and laughed. "You sing, you great gruff growler," he mocked. "Who on earth is going to reward such singing as yours with a supper?" "Here we are, so you will see," replied Bruno, still in perfect good humor. They had reached a hollow tree, from which came a sound like long, deep organ notes, which Ragnar-Hart recognized as the humming of a busy colony of bees. Bruno stood upright, facing the hole in the tree trunk, and began to sing, hoarsely and gruffly and growlingly, just as Ragnar-Hart had said he would. He made up the words as he went along, and this is what he sang. Are you ready? I don't sing very well. "Bees, dear bees of paradise, can you of your star food spare for your friend the big brown bear? Sweet gold for my evening fare, bees, dear bees of paradise." The bees did not seem to mind the gruffness of Bruno's singing, for the long, deep organ notes inside the hollow tree swelled louder and turned into words, and the words were these: "Take, dear bear, your heavenly food, but do not harm our sleeping brood. Take the fruit of sun and star, but come not where our nurslings are. Of their waxen cribs take care, but take your honey, dear brown bear." Then Bruno gently put his big, clumsy paw inside the hollow tree and felt about very delicately. And when he carefully drew it out again, in it was a huge chunk of shining white honeycomb, with clear, thick, golden honey oozing slowly from the broken cells along the edge of it. Bruno stood quite still and sang again. "Bees, dear bees of paradise, thank send you as good to eat. Bees, dear bees of paradise. Then, happily licking the falling drops of honey from the edges of the honeycomb, he shambled on his way beside the prancing Ragnar. I can't think how you can eat such stuff, exclaimed Ragnar, wrinkling his long muzzle in distaste. Give me good, strong flesh to eat. It tastes of earth. But what can your honey taste of? It tastes of heaven, said Bruno very simply. Ragnar sniffed his contempt and went on finding fault with good-natured Bruno. You find your supper in hollow trees, and you make your bed in hollow trees. Why on earth you choose a hollow tree to live in, I simply can't imagine. Why don't you live in a good rock cave, as I do? It does me good to sleep inside the cold, hard earth. It does me good to sleep inside a tree that is warm and living, replied Bruno. I should feel dead and buried if I slept in a cave, as you do. And another thing, Ragnar went on, for it made him feel superior to find fault. Why must you always be trying to walk on 2 legs, as that slow creature, man, does? You would be much swifter and surer if you went on 4 legs, as I do, and all proper thinking animals. The snake in my backbone likes to be lifted up, answered Bruno dreamily, and that seems to matter more than being swift, for sure. There were plenty of other faults that Ragnar could have found with Bruno. He would have liked to tell him that his hair wanted combing, and that his nails wanted cutting, and that his coat wanted brushing, and that his whole appearance was an absolute disgrace. But he could not, because by now they had reached the Sibyl's Bower, and in the Sibyl's Bower the animals could say only kind things to one another. The Sibyl's Bower was the most beautiful spot in all the forest. The Sibyl had made the bower herself by twining together the branches of living plants, so that the ceiling was made of leaves, which flooded the bower beneath them with a soft green light during the day. And in spring, sweet-scented flowers looked down from the ceiling of leaves, and in autumn, ripe fruit hung thick from it. The Sibyl was very wise. She listened to the wind in the trees, and to the stream which flowed through her bower. And there was no secret that she did not know, for she possessed the crystal of truth. At night, when the soft green light from the ceiling of leaves was dimmed, the Sibyl's bower seemed filled with white daylight. This was the light of the crystal of truth. And if you held the crystal of truth in your hands, you did not see things in their outward seeming, but you saw them as they really were inside their enchanted forms. Each evening as the animals of the forest ate together in the Sibyl's bower and gathered on the hearth before her fire, and talked and played and told each other stories, the Sibyl sat apart at her loom, weaving a magic tapestry. She would look up now and again to speak a wise word or to tell a story herself, but she never stopped weaving. The magic tapestry went on, growing day by day, but the Sibyl never seemed to come to the end of it. Ragnar was a very inquisitive fox, and he often rose from his place before the fire and came across the Sibyl's bower to look at the magic tapestry. But the pictures which the Sibyl was weaving did not much appeal to him. They seemed always to be pictures of men and women and angels in a strange land, a land he did not like because it seemed unearthly, and he liked things to belong to the earth, which he saw and smelt and felt and tasted every day. Sometimes the Sibyl wove pictures in which these people were sitting at a banquet, dressed in golden robes with jeweled girdles around their waists, and golden crowns on their heads, and on their breasts golden hearts which pulsed and shone. Bruno loved these scenes, but Ragnar thought the banquets very poor ones. For all the feast upon the table was only bread and wine and fish and honey. But tonight, when Ragnahart came across the Sibyl's bower to look at the growing magic tapestry, his ears stood up with surprise and interest. For the Sibyl had woven a fox playing a lute, and yes, the longer Ragnahart looked at it, the more certain he was that it was a portrait of himself. "Is that a picture of me, Sibyl?" he asked. "It could be, couldn't it?" said the Sibyl, looking up and smiling. "No, it couldn't really," said Ragnahart. "Not with that lute. You know I don't like music." "But wouldn't it be lovely if you did?" the Sibyl murmured, sending her brightly colored shuttles through the web. "Then you could play it to us every evening, and how we should all love it." Ragnahart liked the thought of being the center of attraction, but he reminded her, "I don't know how to play." "But you are so clever. You would soon learn," said the Sibyl. "And you have such nimble paws, dear fox. They are just made for playing a lute. Bruno, reach my lute down from that high branch and let Ragnahart try." Now, Ragnahart felt very flattered when the Sibyl spoke of his cleverness. He was the only animal in the forest who was clever enough to realize how clever the Sibyl herself was, though with quite a different cleverness from his own. But he had always had a rather aggrieved feeling that she did not value his cleverness enough. So when Bruno staggered to the corner of the Sibyl's bower and reached up his clumsy paws and took down the lute from the high branch from which it hung by its embroidered ribbon, Ragnahart took it and slipped the ribbon around his neck and held it against his breast and began to pluck the strings. And immediately he felt something strange happening in his breast where the lute was pressing against it, as though a hard lump there were turning into something between light and water. It was really that the music of the lute was already beginning to melt his heart of stone. The tunes which his nimble paws called forth from the lute were snippy, snappy little tunes, all points and angles and sharp corners, no smoothly flowing melodies. Bruno, who was listening with his head dropped forward on his shaggy breast, opened his little eyes and blinked and groaned. "Oh, Ragnahart," he growled dreamily, "you are playing knives and scissors and pins and pine needles. They keep pricking and cutting me." "What shall I play then?" asked Ragnahart a little huffily. "Play something like this," said Bruno, and in his funny, gruff, singing voice he began to hum a strange, unearthly, haunting melody which gave Ragnahart the oddest sensation of growing bigger and bigger, right out of his skin until he filled the forest and reached right up to the stars. "Stop! Stop!" he cried angrily, for he did not like to feel outside himself like this. It made him feel unsure of himself, and feeling sure of himself was the feeling which of all feelings he liked best. "Stop! Stop, Bruno!" drowsily. Where on earth did you learn such a tune?" "Nowhere on earth, in heaven," Bruno murmured drowsily and fell fast asleep. Ragnahart sniffed to show Bruno that he thought that an absurd remark for him to make, and glanced at the Sibyl to see what she thought of it. But the Sibyl was working steadily at her weaving, sending her brightly colored shuttle through the web, and did not seem to think Bruno had said anything odd at all. Now on Ragnahart's many good points was that if he did a thing at all, he was willing to take a lot of trouble in order to do it well. So he took the lute back to his cave in order to learn to play it better, and he used often to play it when he was alone. Sometimes he made up tunes to lure plump little hens from their roosts, but when he played these with great pride in the Sibyl's bower at sunset, the smaller animals of the forest did not like them. Now and again he would try to recapture that strange, unearthly, haunting melody of Bruno's, but it always gave him that same feeling of growing out of his sleek, well-groomed pelt, so he always very quickly gave it up. But when he played only the snippy, snappy little tunes which came most easily to him, the tunes full of knives and scissors and pins and pine needles, he felt again that new melting sensation in his breast. So the year wore away, and the weather grew cold, and the trees grew bare, and now there began to be gaps in the circle of animals round the fire in the Sibyl's bower. For the hibernating ones, like the snakes and the dormice and the squirrels, had curled themselves up in their winter quarters and gone to sleep till spring. To his surprise, Ragnahart found that, for the first time in his life, he missed them. But the one he missed most was Bruno the bear. For although he scoffed at him so much and had so many faults to find with him, yet he had a corner of him in his melting heart of stone. Ragnahart himself did not feel sleepy in winter. On the contrary, winter made him feel more awake than ever. So he still went to and fro about the forest. And whenever his way led him near Bruno's hollow tree, he always stopped and looked in to see if Bruno showed any signs of waking. And always there was the big brown bear, sleeping away so heavily that neither thunder nor storm, nor even Ragnahart's pinching and poking ever disturbed him. One day at sunset, toward the end of winter, Ragnahart was approaching Bruno's hollow tree when he saw something so amazing that he could hardly believe his own sharp and clever eyes. For just leaving the hollow tree was the most magnificent fairy prince. I'm sorry, I have a fly that is bothering me. Dressed in golden robes, with a jeweled girdle round his waist, and a golden sword hanging from it, with a golden crown on his head, and on his breast a golden heart pulsing and glowing so radiantly that it made a golden mist all about him. Ragnahart could not imagine why such a wonderful and exalted person should visit the shabby brown bear, and he was filled with the greatest surprise and curiosity. So he ran and looked into the hollow tree, meaning to ask Bruno all about it. But stranger than ever, there was Bruno, still fast asleep as he had been all winter. Ragnahart shouted at him and tickled him and poked him and pinched him and pulled his ears and tried to lift his eyelids. But Bruno still slept on. He was so thoroughly sound asleep that Ragnahart knew he could not possibly have wakened to receive the prince. If once Ragnahart scented any mystery, he would never rest until he had unraveled it. So next day, while the sun was still high in the sky, he went and lay in the bushes near Bruno's hollow tree, so that he might see the fairy prince arrive if he came again. Then, while the prince was inside the tree with Bruno, Ragnahart meant to call upon his friend. He peeped into the tree before he lay in the bushes, and there was Bruno, still fast asleep. All afternoon he watched and waited, but he saw no fairy prince arrive. And then, just as the sun was setting, he saw the fairy prince come out of the hollow tree and walk away through the forest. How extraordinary, thought Ragnahart, really puzzled. How on earth did he get in without my seeing him? And why on earth does he visit Bruno when Bruno never wakes? Again he peeped inside the tree, and there was Bruno sleeping, just as he had seen him when he arrived to watch for the prince. Again he tried to waken him, and Bruno slept on. And suddenly Ragnahart realized something which made everything seem stranger than ever. He realized that Bruno was so big that he entirely filled the hollow trunk. There isn't room anywhere in Bruno's tree for the prince, he thought. And yet, with my own two sharp, clever eyes, I saw the prince come out of it. And then he thought, I wonder where the prince comes from. I wonder where he goes to. So next day he came and waited and watched again. Again he never saw the fairy prince enter the tree. But again, just as the sun was setting, he saw the prince come out of the tree and walk away through the forest. And this time Ragnahart followed him. The prince went on through the forest to a part of which Ragnahart had never been before. Here, where the trees stopped, there rose a high mountain. With Ragnahart following him, and when he reached the summit, he stepped off onto steps of cloud. The prince climbed the steps of cloud. I think this is the one picture in the book. Up and up and up until at last he came to the golden gates of heaven. They opened as the prince approached, and he went through them. Then they closed fast behind, leaving Ragnahart behind. Ragnar peered through the bars and saw a most strange and unearthly land. A land of delicate floating colors, as if rainbows had broken loose and were drifting everywhere. Everywhere was quite silent, and everywhere was bathed in a soft and tender golden haze. Ragnar did not like it very much, for it was so unlike Earth. He was very inquisitive that he thought he would like to go in, just to see what he could find out about Bruno's mysterious visitor. So he knocked at the golden gates very loudly. Oh, sorry, hugs and kisses, you fell off the shelf. And St. Peter got up from his golden rock and came toward the gates. "I want to come in," said Ragnar haughtily. "I'm sorry, but at present you can't," said Peter very kindly. "It's awfully hard at any time for little tailors to get into heaven." Ragnar wondered why St. Peter should mistake a fox for a little tailor. At any other time, he would at once have asked him why, but now he was too deeply offended to ask any questions. Without another word, he lifted his muzzle high in the air and turned and stalked away in dignified silence. As he came down the steps of cloud and down the mountain, it seemed to him that he must have been away a very long time, for warm breezes met him, and the trees were putting forth leaf buds, and bulbs were putting forth flower buds, and everywhere there were signs that the spring had arrived. "Bruno will soon be awake again," thought Ragnar. "Perhaps he will come to the Sibyl's bower tonight." And at the pleasure he felt at the prospect of talking with Bruno again, the stone which was his heart, melted a little more. When Ragnar came that evening to the Sibyl's bower, the Sibyl was working at her magic tapestry, and he went to look at it. And again his ears stood up in surprise and interest. For now he recognized the strange, unearthly land in her pictures. It was the very land he had seen last night through the golden gates of heaven. Then he looked again, and again his ears were pricked with even greater surprise and interest. For the prince she had just finished weaving, the prince, sitting at a banquet of bread and wine and fish and honey, was no other than Bruno's prince himself. "Is that a picture of Bruno's Prince Sibyl?" he asked. "It could be, couldn't it?" she said, looking up and smiling. "There's a mystery about that prince," said Ragnar. "There are many mysteries about every prince," the Sibyl murmured, sending her brightly colored shuttle through the web. "But the biggest mystery of all," went on Ragnar, "is how he gets inside the tree when Bruno's there. There simply isn't room for two." "There wouldn't need to be, would there?" smiled the Sibyl, "if the two were really one." "The two really one?" echoed Ragnar, mystified. Then he saw what the Sibyl meant, for he really was a clever fox, with thoughts as swift and nimble as his feet. "You mean Bruno is the fairy prince?" And just then Bruno came in, still drowsy from his long winter sleep. Ragnar watched him shuffling along, shabby, clumsy, stumbling, his pelt all tattered and torn, and he marveled how anyone as wise as the Sibyl was, could possibly suggest that such a ragtag and bobbletail tattered demillion could be the handsome, graceful, gold-clad fairy prince. Ragnar sniffed a gigantic sniff to show how absurd he found the suggestion, but when he turned back to the Sibyl, she was regarding him with her wise and quiet smile. "Take the crystal of truth in your paw," the Sibyl whispered, "and then look at Bruno again." Ragnar felt that if he did not unravel this mystery, he would die of curiosity. So he went across the Sibyl's bower to the great stone on which the crystal of truth was kept, and he took the crystal of truth in his paw and fixed his sharp, bright eyes on Bruno. For a moment Ragnar was blinded by the crystal's clear white light, brighter than any daylight. Then the shabby, clumsy bear was there no longer, but in his place stood the fairy prince, dressed in golden robes, with the jeweled girdle around his waist, and the golden sword at his side, a golden crown upon his head, and upon his breast a heart of glowing, pulsing gold. And while Ragnahart stood gazing and gasping, hardly able to believe his own sharp, bright eyes, the Sibyl whispered again, "And now look at yourself in the crystal of truth." Ragnahart looked at himself in the crystal of truth, and he felt very proud of the elegant and gentlemanly fox he saw there. Then again he was blinded for a moment by the crystal's clear white light, brighter than any daylight. And then the sleek pelt and the long muzzle and the big bushy brush disappeared, and there stood a little tailor in a gray jerkin with shrewd, bright eyes and a long, inquisitive nose and nimble fingers and a great pair of scissors stuck into his belt. Bruno, a fairy prince, and himself a little tailor. Ragnahart's pride would not allow him to believe it. But as he gazed, spellbound, at the long-nosed, bright-eyed little tailor, he began to see that he was a tremendously clever fellow. Yes, in that way the little tailor was like the wonderful Ragnahart, after all. And then Ragnahart thought of a clever way of finding out if the crystal of truth was really telling the truth. While Ragnahart had been gazing at the little tailor in the crystal, the fairy prince had become a bear again. So now Ragnahart, still looking into the crystal, snatched the big scissors from his belt and dashed across the Sibyl's bower and slashed open the front of Bruno's tattered pelt. And there, through the gaping bearskin, he caught a glimpse of a golden robe and a jeweled girdle and a heart of glowing, pulsing gold. "Oh, dear, what a bundle of rags I am," said Bruno, mildly, blinking down at himself. "I do need a needle and thread." "Dear fox," said the Sibyl quietly, "you must sew the bearskin together again." So the little tailor took a needle and thread from the front of his jerkin and sewed the rent together. And he did it so skillfully that you could not tell the bearskin had been cut at all. "That is quite perfect, Ragnahart," the Sibyl praised him. "You certainly are a clever little tailor." Can you see this in your head? Can you see this up here? It's so beautiful. And the way in which she said it, and Bruno's pleasure in the beautiful mending of his pelt, and his own joy in doing the mending beautifully, melted the stone in Ragnahart's breast a little more yet. "So St. Peter was right after all, when he called me a little tailor," said Ragnahart. "But I wonder why he wouldn't let me enter heaven." "Why did you want to enter heaven?" said the Sibyl. "Out of curiosity," replied Ragnahart. "That's why you couldn't," said the Sibyl. "That's why St. Peter said you couldn't at present." "But I'd like to enter for another reason now," went on Ragnahart. "And what is that?" asked the Sibyl. "To be there with Bruno," said Ragnahart. "Then try again," smiled the Sibyl. So the next evening, when at sunset Bruno turned into the fairy prince, Ragnahart turned into a little tailor, and together they went to the edge of the forest and climbed the high mountain and the steps of cloud to the golden gates of heaven. And the golden gates flew open to let the prince come in, but they clashed together again in the face of the little tailor. "Please, may I come in?" But they clashed together again. "Oh, please, may I come in?" asked the little tailor humbly. He did not say, "I want to," haughtily as he had the first time. St. Peter was sitting on his golden rock, and St. John was standing beside him, talking with a pen made out of an angel's feather in his hand and his eagle on his shoulder. "I'm afraid that first you must show us what you can do," St. John said very kindly. The little tailor looked about for something that would help him to show how clever he was. First he saw a little naked child standing close to him and gazing wistfully up into his face, but he did not see how she could help him to show how clever he was, so he looked away. Then he saw the cloths of twilight hanging, the most beautiful cloths in the whole world, cloths of gauze and silk and velvet, blue and purple and dove gray, and as soon as he saw the cloths of twilight, Ragnahart knew what he could do to show how clever he was. Out came his great pair of scissors from his belt, and snip, 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 snip they went. this way and that, in a gay, mad, sparkling dance of cuts and slashes, till half of the cloths of twilight lay in shreds and snippets, all most elegantly shaped, all over the clouds in front of the golden gates. He certainly is a clever little tailor, exclaimed St. Peter enthusiastically. The flash of these scissors was like sword play. Don't you think that we might let him in? Oh, Peter, how we do love sword play, St. John said, smiling. Don't you see that the little tailor is so clever he would wreck heaven if we let him in? It will need a whole company of angels working night and day as it is to make the cloths of twilight whole again. And how many more would it not need to make heaven whole again if those clever scissors began madly snipping at the sun and moon and stars? So Ragnahart turned away from the golden gates again. But this time he went down the steps and cloud and the mountains, not in offended pride, but in sadness. For heaven no longer seemed to him a strange place, which he did not like very much. He was beginning to be as homesick for heaven as if heaven were earth. And his homesickness for heaven made the stone heart in his breast melt more and more. Ragnahart went to the Sibyl's bower and told the Sibyl all that had happened. She was silent till all was told. Then she asked, "What good were the cloths of twilight when you had cut them into snippets?" "No good at all," said Ragnahart. Then the Sibyl asked another question. What did you do when you had cut Bruno's bearskin?" "Sewed it up again," said Ragnahart. Then the Sibyl said no more, but went on with her magic tapestry, sending her brightly colored shuttle through the web, and Ragnahart looked at the picture she was weaving, and it was a picture of a little tailor and a naked child, who was gazing wistfully up into his face, and suddenly his melting heart told him what to do next time. And the next evening, when again he climbed the steps with Bruno, and again the golden gates opened for the prince, but not for him, he looked about him and saw once more the little naked child gazing wistfully up into his face. And this time he smiled at her, and chose the most beautiful of all the cloths of twilight, the one of soft blue silk, and from it, with his clever scissors, he carefully cut out a little garment, and he sewed it together with most loving skill. And then he put it on the little naked child, and the child smiled back at him and put her hand in his and led him to the golden gates. And the gates opened and let them both in, and St. Peter and St. John smiled in friendly fashion and welcomed the little tailor into heaven. Then Ragnahart stood amazed, for it had been quite silent everywhere when he stood outside the golden gates. But as soon as he entered heaven, it was just as if everything burst out singing. The grass was singing, and the corn was singing, the trees were singing, and the flowers were singing, and the fruits were singing, the air was singing, the sun was singing, the streams were singing, the very ground was singing, and everywhere there were angels with harps and shawms and dulcimers playing to the singing. And the melody was the one which Bruno had sung to him. A long, long way off, Ragnahart could see the fairy prince seated at a banquet. Nobody asked the little tailor to come to the table and eat. At one time, Ragnahart would have been offended, but now he did not mind. He felt very humble and very happy, and very, very grateful that he had been allowed to enter heaven at all. When he said this to the Sibyl on his return to the forest, she smiled a most beautiful smile. "Those who feast in heaven are those who have helped to fashion heaven," she said. Then she went silent and went on working at her magic tapestry. And when Ragnahart looked at the picture she was weaving, he saw it was a picture of a little tailor playing on a lute. Then Ragnahart went back to his cave, and he took down the Sibyl's lute from its rocky shelf, and he began to play the heavenly melody which Bruno had once sung to him. And as he played it, he began to grow and grow, till he left his fox skin far away below him, and he found himself before the golden gates. And they opened to him, and he went in and sat down on the heavenly lawns near the angels who were playing their harps and shawms and dulcimers, and he began to play his lute with them. And they all looked at him and smiled and nodded a friendly greeting, as if to an old comrade. and the stone in his breast melted quite away, and the place where it had been grew warm and glowing, and he felt as if he had all his life been wandering and had now at last come home. And when he came back to the forest and went to the Sibyl's bower, the Sibyl held out both her hands to him in welcome and kissed him on the brow. And when he looked at her magic tapestry, he saw a woven picture of a little tailor dressed as royally as any prince, and on his breast there glowed and pulsed a heart of gold. And he sat at the banquet beside the other prince, his friend, and they were both eating honey. I really hope you enjoyed this story. I love this story. I read it years ago, and I just love this story, and it's about a fox, and so I thought it was very appropriate for my little group. And I will see you again very, very soon.